Let me tell you about the time something happened that I'll never forget. You know those stories people tell, the kind where you're not sure if they're pulling your leg or if there's a sliver of truth to them? Well, this one's no campfire tale. It's real, and it's wild. I live in a small, quiet trailer park in the woods of Northern California, not far from the Klamath River. It's the kind of place where life is simple and folks are down to earth. Everyone knows everyone else's business, but no one makes a fuss about it. You nod to your neighbor in the morning, and that's enough. It's peaceful, and I liked it that way. Now, Tuesdays are a big deal around here. That's when the steak truck shows up, selling meat that didn't move over the weekend. It's a little tradition in the park, everyone gathering around to snag a deal. At the time, I didn't have much going on, just fixing up old bikes and selling them to make ends meet. I spent most of my days out in front of my trailer, tinkering with chains and gears, keeping my head down. It was a Tuesday evening. I was working on a particularly stubborn bike chain when I heard this strange noise. It wasn't the usual sounds you hear in the woods, birds, squirrels, maybe the occasional deer rustling through the underbrush. No, this was different. It was a heavy thumping, like something big was out there. I stood up and looked into the trees, but the dusk was thick, making it hard to see much. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just a deer. They come down from the hills all the time, sometimes rubbing their antlers on the trees. But something about that noise didn't sit right with me. It was louder, heavier, more intentional. Curiosity got the best of me. I wiped my hands on my jeans and started walking toward the edge of the park, where the trees grew denser. The air was cooler there, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine needles. The closer I got, the more the sound seemed to pull me in. And then I saw it. Standing just beyond the tree line was a massive figure, tall and broad. It was hunched over a bear-proof trash can, tossing it around like it weighed nothing. I'd heard stories of Bigfoot. Who hasn't? But I never believed them. Yet, here it was, right in front of me. I froze, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. The creature stopped what it was doing and looked straight at me. Its eyes were dark, but there was something in them, a spark of intelligence, maybe even curiosity. It didn't seem angry or aggressive, just aware. It made this low, rumbling sound that I could feel deep in my chest. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Then, without warning, it picked up the trash can and started walking away, deeper into the woods. I don't know what possessed me, but I followed it. I kept a safe distance, not wanting to spook it, or myself, for that matter. The creature moved gracefully for something so large, navigating the trees and underbrush with ease. I could hear the soft thud of its footsteps, the occasional crack of a branch under its weight. It never looked back, but I knew it was aware of me. Time seemed to blur as I trailed the creature deeper into the forest. It was like I was in a trance, my body moving on its own while my mind struggled to process what was happening. Eventually, we reached the base of a tall cliff. The creature dropped the trash can, now bent and mangled, and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the cliff, my mind racing. What had I just seen? Was it real? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do now? I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't about to climb that cliff in the dark, following a creature I knew nothing about. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard it again. The thumping sound, closer this time. My heart leapt into my throat as the creature emerged from the trees once more. It stopped when it saw me, and we stood there facing each other again. But this time, something was different. I wasn't afraid. In fact, I felt a strange sense of calm, like I was witnessing something important, something bigger than myself. The creature and I locked eyes, and for a moment, it didn't move any closer, and neither did I. We just watched. Then, as silently as it had come, the creature turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest once more. I didn't follow this time. Instead, I made my way back to the trailer park, my mind buzzing with questions. The next day, I couldn't keep quiet about it. I started asking around, trying to find out if anyone else had ever seen something strange in the woods. Most folks just laughed it off, but one neighbor told me to talk to Jerry, an old-timer who'd lived in the park for decades. When I found Jerry, he didn't even hesitate. He pulled me aside and told me in a hushed voice that he'd seen the creature too, years ago, when the park was still new and the trees grew right up to the trailers. He described it just like I had, tall, furry, and surprisingly calm. He said he'd kept quiet about it all these years, not wanting to stir up trouble or seem crazy. Hearing Jerry's story made me feel less alone, like I hadn't imagined the whole thing. After that, I didn't go looking for the creature again, but sometimes, late at night, I'd hear that familiar thumping sound in the distance. And every time, I'd smile, knowing that I had a secret, a wild, incredible secret that only a few of us knew. I've got a story for you. It might sound strange, but I hope you'll stick around to hear it. My name is John, and I'm from a small town in northern Louisiana, not too far from the Arkansas border. Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated by mysteries, strange creatures, and unexplained events. So when I found out you were looking for stories from people like me, I knew I had to share mine. This all happened a few years ago at a small lake not far from my town. I love fishing, and that day, I went with my friend Wilson. It was one of those calm evenings when the sun was setting and everything around was quiet. We were just getting ready to leave when something very strange happened. Wilson had packed up his stuff and driven off a little earlier because his house is in the opposite direction of mine. I stayed back a bit longer to gather my things. Once Wilson was gone, I noticed something moving on a tiny island in the middle of the lake. At first, I thought it was a person bent over, maybe looking for something they had dropped. But then, they stood up in a really weird way. Their body moved like a machine, almost too stiff to be human. I was about 100 yards away, squinting to get a better look. Then, in a blink of an eye, this thing spun around to face me. It turned its entire body without moving its feet. It was as if it rotated in place, which doesn't make sense, but that's what I saw. The creature was over 6 feet. Its skin was a strange green color, kind of like the murky water you see in ponds, and it looked rough, like the skin of an alligator. But the most shocking thing was its eyes. They were huge, bright yellow with black, slit-like pupils. When the last bit of sunlight hit them, they almost seemed to glow. Its head was long and shaped a bit like a dinosaur's, with sharp ridges running down its back. The creature's arms were too long for its body and ended in claws that looked like they could tear through metal, like it was built to be incredibly strong. But what really scared me was the way it moved. It was too smooth, too controlled, like nothing I had ever seen before. Then, the creature opened its wings. They weren't like bird wings with feathers. These wings were leathery, like a bat's, and when it spread them out, they were massive, at least twice as wide as the creature was tall. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I realized I was looking at something I couldn't explain. Even though the creature was terrifying, it didn't make a sound. At least, I didn't hear anything over my own fear. It started moving toward me, but it didn't run like a person. Instead, it lunged forward, using its wings to keep its balance. Its legs were thick, and it had 3-toed feet with sharp talons, like the claws of a bird of prey, except much larger. When it jumped, it moved as if gravity didn't affect it the same way it affects us. It was as if the creature was floating for a moment before landing lightly on the ground again. That's when I snapped out of my shock. I knew I had to get out of there fast. I ran to my car, jumped in, and started the engine. I looked up just in time to see the creature launch itself into the air, its giant wings spreading wide as it flew. But something about the way it flew was strange. It wasn't smooth or graceful like a bird. It was more awkward, but still effective. I drove as fast as I could, not looking back until I was far from the lake and on the main road. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. As I was calming down, my phone rang. It was Wilson. At first, I thought he was just calling to make sure I made it out okay, but his voice sounded strange. He told me that after he had left the lake, he saw something strange in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought it was an owl flying across the road, but then he realized it was much too big to be an owl. I asked him if he noticed anything else, but he said no. He only saw it for a second before it disappeared into the trees. That's when I told him what I had seen by the lake. We were both pretty shaken up after that conversation. Even though we used to fish there all the time, we decided never to go back. I don't care how good the fishing is, nothing could make me set foot near that place again. It's been years since that day, and I've never seen anything like that creature again. But I still think about it from time to time, especially when the sun is setting and everything around me gets quiet. I've been searching for other stories about creatures like the one I saw, but I haven't found anything that matches. It's hard to believe that what I saw was real, but I know it was. And now, whenever I'm out by a lake or in the woods, I can't help but keep an eye out for anything unusual. I'm really glad I got to share my story with you. I've been holding on to it for a long time, and it feels good to finally get it off my chest. If anyone out there has seen something similar, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe I'm not the only one who's had a close encounter with a creature like this. Thanks for listening, and be careful if you ever find yourself out by a quiet lake when the sun is going down. You never know what might be watching you from the shadows. I am a botanist, a seeker of life in its most hidden forms, tasked with discovering new plants in lands far from home. The world is vast, and its mysteries seem endless, but I had no idea how strange the journey would become. I was traveling through the far reaches of Central Asia, a place of harsh deserts, endless steppe, and mountains that pierced the sky. The air there was dry, and the soil cracked like old bones. It was a land of wild beauty, a place that seemed to stand on the very edge of civilization. My journey had been long and arduous. My mission was to discover new species of plants, some of which might hold medicinal properties or provide new sources of food. The plants in these remote regions were unknown to the scholars back home, and I was eager to bring them back, a prize for the eyes of the curious. Days turned into weeks as I moved deeper into the wilderness, cataloging every new plant I found. Tiny flowers clinging to rocks, thorny bushes that survived on barely any water, and strange creeping vines that seemed to have no end. One day, as I trekked through the wide plains, the landscape began to change. The dry earth gave way to a softer ground, a rich, loamy soil that felt spongy underfoot. I noticed a sudden burst of greenery, a patch of life in an otherwise barren land. It was here that I stumbled upon something entirely unexpected, something that would haunt me for the rest of my days: the lamb of Tartary. I had heard rumors of this mythical creature, whispered tales told by travelers and traders. The lamb of Tartary, they said, was no ordinary plant. It was a living creature that grew from the ground, tethered to the earth by a stem like an umbilical cord. I had dismissed these stories as mere legend, the product of overactive imaginations. After all, how could something be both plant and animal? But as I approached the grove, I saw it for myself, and my disbelief shattered. There, in the center of the patch, stood what looked like a low, bushy plant, its leaves large and green, swaying gently in the wind. But it wasn't the plant itself that caught my eye. Beneath the leaves, nestled among the branches, was a creature, a lamb. Its wool was thick and white, soft as any sheep I had ever seen, and its eyes blinked slowly in the dim light of the afternoon sun. It was true. The lamb of Tartary was real. I crept closer, careful not to make any sudden movements for fear of disturbing this delicate creature. As I drew near, I could see the thin stem that connected the lamb to the plant. It was like an umbilical cord, growing from the center of its belly and rooting it firmly in the earth. The lamb was alive, but it could not move from its spot. It grazed on the plants around it, nibbling on the grass with small, contented bites. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This was no ordinary creature, and yet it seemed to belong here, as if the land itself had birthed it. I took out my notebook and began to sketch the plant, noting every detail: the shape of its leaves, the color of its wool, the strange, sweet scent that filled the air around it. I had never encountered anything like this before. As I studied the lamb, I began to realize the true nature of this zoophyte, this half-plant, half-animal hybrid. The lamb was not simply attached to the plant, it was part of it. The stem that connected them carried life between the two, as though they were one organism. The plant provided sustenance to the lamb, drawing nutrients from the soil, while the lamb grazed on the grasses around it, fertilizing the earth with its droppings. It was a perfect symbiosis, a cycle of life and death bound together in an endless loop. I spent hours observing the lamb of Tartary, mesmerized by its strange beauty. But I knew I had to leave. I could not take the lamb with me, for it was rooted in this place, a part of the land itself. But I could take my notes, my sketches, and the memory of this encounter. I would return home with the proof that this creature existed, that the legends were true. As I turned to go, I felt a pang of sorrow. The lamb of Tartary would remain here, hidden from the world, known only to those few who ventured into these remote parts. It was a rare and fragile thing, a wonder of nature that could never be fully understood. And perhaps that was for the best. I had made a living as a hunter, traveling across the vast lands of Africa, chasing the wildest of animals. Yet none of them compared to the creature I sought now. They called it the Kasai Rex. The first time I heard the name, I was a young boy sitting by the fire, listening to the elders speak. They told stories of a massive creature that roamed the Kasai Valley, a beast as old as the earth itself. Some said it was a dinosaur, a creature that had somehow survived the extinction that wiped out its kind millions of years ago. Others claimed it was a myth, a tale to scare children and keep them close to the village at night. But I knew better. I had seen its tracks. I had heard its roar echoing through the valley. Now, as a seasoned hunter with years of experience, I was finally prepared to face the creature. By my side was my trusted assistant, a young man named Kato. He had sharp eyes and quick reflexes, but even he was nervous about this hunt. I could see it in the way his hands trembled as he loaded our supplies into the truck. He had heard the stories too. The journey into the heart of the Kasai Valley was long and treacherous. The landscape changed from dry, cracked earth to thick, dense jungle. Towering trees blocked out the sun, and the air was thick with humidity. We pressed on, knowing that the further we went, the closer we got to the Kasai Rex's territory. I kept my eyes on the ground, looking for any sign of the creature. A broken branch, a deep footprint in the mud. Anything that would tell me we were on the right track. Days passed with little more than glimpses of large animals, but nothing out of the ordinary. Elephants roamed in the distance, their trunks swaying as they grazed. A pack of wild dogs sprinted across the savanna, their sleek bodies cutting through the tall grass like shadows. But still, there was no sign of the beast we sought. On the fourth day, we found the first real sign. Deep in the mud, near the banks of a wide river, was a footprint. It was massive, far larger than any animal I had ever encountered. The toes were long and sharp, leaving deep grooves in the earth. I knelt beside it. This was it. The Kasai Rex was real, and it was close. From that moment on, we moved with caution. Every rustle in the bushes, every distant sound made me grip my rifle tighter. The jungle around us seemed to grow quieter, as if even the animals were hiding from the predator that ruled these lands. Cato and I set up camp near the river, keeping our fire small to avoid drawing too much attention. We slept in shifts, each of us taking turns watching the darkness for any sign of the beast. On the 7th day, it came. The ground shook beneath our feet. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, but then I heard it. The roar. It was low and deep, vibrating through the trees and sending birds scattering into the sky. Cato's eyes widened in fear, but I motioned for him to stay calm. We had prepared for this moment. Grabbing my rifle, I stood up slowly, scanning the jungle around us. The roar came again, louder this time, and then I saw it. The Kasai Rex. It was larger than anything I could have imagined. Its massive head rose above the trees, rows of sharp teeth gleaming in the fading sunlight. Its body was covered in rough, scaly skin, and its powerful legs crushed the earth beneath it with every step. This was no myth. This was a living, breathing creature from a time long past. I raised my rifle, but before I could take aim, the beast turned and charged. The ground trembled as it barreled toward us, its jaws snapping open and closed with terrifying speed. There was no time to think. I fired a shot, but it barely grazed the creature's thick hide. Cato scrambled for cover, diving behind a large rock, while I stood my ground, reloading as fast as I could. The Kasai Rex was relentless. It tore through the jungle with ease, knocking down trees as if they were twigs. I fired again, aiming for its massive chest, but the bullets seemed to have little effect. It was like trying to stop a charging rhino with a pebble. Desperation gripped me as the creature closed the distance between us. But then something changed. The Kasai Rex stopped, its eyes locking onto something in the distance. It let out a final earth-shaking roar before turning away. I stood there, panting, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Cato emerged from behind the rock, his face pale with shock. We had survived. In a quiet corner of New York City, there was a small vintage shop that few people knew about. It was called Old Treasures, and it sold all kinds of forgotten things: dusty books, worn-out furniture, and old clothes from a time long ago. The shop had no bright signs or big windows. People only found it by accident, as if they were being pulled inside by something unseen. The shop's owner, Mrs. Penny, was an elderly woman who had lived in the city her whole life. She loved collecting old things, and her shop was filled with strange objects. But there was something odd about Old Treasures. Every time someone bought something, it was as if the shop didn't want to let it go. The lights would flicker, the doors would creak, and strange shadows would dance on the walls. People began to notice that whenever they took something home from the shop, strange things would happen. One woman bought an old mirror. When she hung it in her bedroom, she started seeing a figure behind her reflection, but when she turned around, no one was there. A man bought an antique clock, and every night at midnight, it would start ticking, even though it had no batteries. He would hear whispers coming from the room where the clock stood, but when he listened closer, the whispers stopped. Some say the shop itself was haunted. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember, standing in the same spot while other buildings around it changed. The walls were dark and covered in dust, and the air inside always felt cold, no matter how warm it was outside. Sometimes, people could hear soft footsteps behind them as they wandered through the shop, but when they turned around, no one was there. At night, after Mrs. Penny locked up and went home, the shop was never truly empty. Through the dark windows, faint lights would glow. If anyone passed by, they might see a shadow move or hear the faint sound of music from a gramophone that hadn't played in years. One day, Mrs. Penny stopped showing up to open the shop. People said she had disappeared, just like many of the things in Old Treasures. But the shop stayed open, as if it didn't need anyone to run it. The door was always unlocked, the lights still flickered, and the shelves were always full of old, forgotten things. Some people still wander in, drawn by the mystery of the shop, but they never leave without a strange feeling that something is watching them. And so, Old Treasures remains, a place where time stands still and the past never truly leaves. It waits, quiet and patient, for its next visitor to step inside.